Welcome to the debate. Imagine spending hundreds of millions of dollars to upgrade your company's digital nervous system, and then
And having a single, outdated line of tax code just completely halt your supply chain on day one.
exactly, it's a nightmare scenario. Today, we're looking at, well, the largest technology investment most global organizations are going to make this decade, the migration to SAP S/4HANA.
Right.
Now, S/4HANA is widely understood as this vastly superior platform compared to its predecessors. I mean, it brings cloud-native scalability, incredible in-memory processing that can handle massive data sets in literally the blink of an eye.
Yeah, it's a powerhouse.
It really is. But underneath that shiny new capability lies this universally underweighted dimension, and that is the tax and compliance architecture.
And that dimension is really where these massive projects quietly succeed, or frankly, where they catastrophically fail.
Right.
When a company transitions to S/4HANA, they're faced with a monumental choice. Do you treat the migration strictly as a technology replacement, focused on fidelity to your existing business processes, or do you treat it as a fundamental operating model redesign that completely decouples your compliance from the ERP core?
Well, I argue that this migration absolutely must be an operating model redesign utilizing that decoupled architecture. To put it simply, migrating legacy tax architecture into S/4HANA is just a category error.
A category error?
Yeah.
Let me give you an analogy. What happens if you take a fragile, obsolete Model T engine, one built for a completely different era of engineering, and you bolt it into a modern Formula One chassis, and then, you hit the accelerator? I'm guessing it doesn't end well.
You definitely don't win the race. The sheer compounding forces just tear that obsolete engine apart. Processing batch-era compliance logic at S/4HANA speeds doesn't modernize compliance. It just accelerates its failure.
Okay, that is a very vivid picture. But I think you're ignoring the reality of the race itself. I mean, if we spend years trying to build a completely new engine from scratch while also building the chassis, the racing team goes bankrupt before the car even reaches the starting line.
Well, I wouldn't say bankrupt.
I would. I argue that treating this migration as a technology replacement, utilizing an ERP-centric model is actually the most viable path. It leverages native SAP functionality, it stays within the technical scope of the project, and crucially, it minimizes the immense risk of broadening an already massive ERP migration into a total business redesign. You cannot win the race if you never make it to the track.
I hear you on the project's survival aspect, but let's define what we actually mean by these two architectures so we know exactly what's at stake here.
Fair enough.
So when I advocate for a decoupled architecture, I mean keeping the SAP core completely clean. You externalize all the complex tax logic, the regulatory format generation, communication with government authorities. All of that goes into a dedicated external compliance layer.
Right.
Builds the whole regulatory burden.
And the ERP-centric model, which I am defending, means embedding that compliance logic inside the SAP core. You utilize native, country-specific tax codes and configurations that SAP already provides out of the box.
Which is what people have done for 20 years.
Because it works. We have to ground this in the reality of enterprise transformation. An S/4HANA program is literally a bet the company initiative. We are migrating the core financial, supply chain, and manufacturing operations of massive global enterprises.
Sure.
The objective must be fidelity. You need to migrate the existing business processes, minimize disruption, and actually turn the lights on at the go-live date. I mean, if the ERP doesn't work, the company stops functioning.
Yeah, but that is exactly my point. If the ERP is functioning at lightning speed, but your compliance architecture isn't built for that velocity, the company stops functioning anyway.
I don't see it as that binary.
Let's unpack the mechanics of this speed paradox, okay? Specifically, the elimination of the old ECC batch processing buffer. In the old SAP environment, latency was actually a feature, not a bug.
Right, because things were slower.
Exactly. If there were errors in the tax data, say a wrong tax code on a purchase order, they were often caught during period-end processes. An accountant had days, sometimes weeks, to fix the spreadsheet before submitting it to the government.
Ah, yes, the famous accountant's buffer.
Exactly. S/4HANA eliminates that buffer completely. It is designed for real-time processing. And this is happening at the exact same time that the globe is shifting to continuous transaction controls, or CTC jurisdictions.
Right, which are essentially government mandates where they want to see your invoice data in real time before the transaction is even finalized.
Right, so let's visualize how this actually plays out. Imagine a truck full of perishable goods pulling up to the border in Brazil.
Okay.
The SAP system fires off an XML file to the government portal, but because you ported over a hard-coded, error-prone legacy data model into your shiny new S/4HANA system, there's a tiny discrepancy in the tax calculation.
A few cents off.
Right, just a minor thing. In the old days, an accountant fixed that later. Today, the government API rejects it in milliseconds. The boom gate at the border stays down. The perishable goods just sit there and rot in the truck.
Well,
That is not a minor tax reporting error. That is an immediate, catastrophic supply chain failure caused by speed. The speed of S/4HANA turns a hidden compliance risk into a day-one operational halt.
look, I fully acknowledge the reality of CTC jurisdictions. Government platforms validating invoices in real time is the new normal across Latin America, and frankly, we're seeing it sweep across Europe right now, too.
Right. Italy, Poland, France is coming.
Exactly. But let's look at how companies actually mitigate that risk on go-live. Solving this within the SAP core provides immediate stability. SAP has localized functionalities. You can use local formats embedded directly within the system to meet these exact mandates.
But at what cost?
At the cost of successfully launching the system. I mean, if you try to re-architect entirely new API handoffs to an external compliance layer at the exact same time you're trying to stabilize a new ERP, you introduce massive integration risks.
It's not that massive.
It is, though. Middleware isn't magic. APIs drop packets, they experience downtime. If you have an external tax engine and a core ERP, and that API connection fails on day one, you can't issue an invoice anyway.
Well, you have redundancies for that.
But worse, when it fails, you have the SAP team pointing fingers at the tax engine vendor, and the tax engine vendor pointing fingers at the middleware team. It's a mess. By keeping it native to SAP, you utilize the system's inherent stability and the existing expertise of your implementation team to ensure those trucks actually cross the border.
Okay, I'm not convinced by that line of reasoning because you're treating day one as the only finish line. You mentioned surviving day one by baking custom code into SAP to keep that boom gate open.
Yes, a tactical win.
But if we use custom programs to survive day one, haven't we just guaranteed that day 100, when a regulatory schema inevitably updates, requires a massive IT project instead of a simple configuration change?
Well, we've guaranteed that the company reaches day 100 in the first place.
Come on.
No, really. You're assuming the implementation of a decoupled architecture goes perfectly. But this brings us to the core of enterprise IT reality, right? The tension between technical debt and the idealized clean core.
The clean core is the whole point of S/4HANA.
In theory. But if you're a project manager listening to this, you are intimately familiar with these constraints. Tax is almost always a sub-work stream within the finance module.
True.
The project management office is trying to orchestrate finance alongside controlling, materials management, sales and distribution, all on a rigid, unforgiving timeline with hundreds of consultants billing by the hour.
And their mandate is just to get it done.
Exactly. Saying we will handle tax natively is a pragmatic survival strategy. It utilizes the existing consultancy expertise. The people implementing S/4HANA are SAP experts. They know how to configure native tax codes.
Right.
They are not enterprise data architects who specialize in abstract external tax engines. If we demand a totally clean core from day one, we paralyze the core financial implementation.
I mean, that makes perfect sense for the IT implementation team and the consultants who get to roll off the project and go home after go live.
They do their jobs.
Sure, but the global CFO has to live with the aftermath. We will handle tax natively is quite literally the most expensive sentence in an S/4HANA program. It is the textbook definition of risk accumulation.
How so?
Let's look closely at the mechanics of what happens when you over-customize the SAP core to meet these local compliance needs. You know what I'm talking about. Z programs.
Ah, yes, Z programs.
Right. And for those who might not live in the code every day, Z programs are bespoke bits of ABAP code that developers write directly into the SAP core to handle local quirks that the standard system just doesn't accommodate out of the box.
Right, custom code.
Every time a consultant writes one of those custom scripts or embeds a country-specific configuration into the core, it becomes a permanent structural dependency.
But they solve the immediate business requirement.
Temporarily. But why does that matter in the long run? Because every time SAP releases an upgrade, which, you need for security, for new features, for performance, your IT team now has to freeze the entire system.
Well, they test it.
They have to perform a rigorous regression testing against every single piece of that custom compliance logic. They have to ensure the new SAP update didn't break the custom Z program running the tax calculation in Brazil or the reporting format in Italy.
That's standard IT protocol.
But you are artificially forcing your compliance updates onto the SAP IT release cycle, which is notoriously slow and cautious, rather than the regulatory cycle, which moves at breakneck speed. That technical debt makes SAP upgrades incredibly expensive, highly risky, and practically infrequent. Your legacy architecture acts like a massive anchor dragging behind a speedboat.
You are describing a theoretical state of perfection that simply does not exist in enterprise IT. Customizations exist because local business realities demand them.
But they don't have to exist in the core.
Yes, regression testing is difficult, it is resource-intensive, but it is a known quantity. We have entire, highly matured methodologies built around SAP testing. By keeping the logic in the ERP, the business owns the process end-to-end within a single system of record.
Right, a very slow system of record.
When you externalize it, as I mentioned earlier, you don't eliminate the complexity of tax, you just move it to the integration layer. Now, instead of testing SAP, your IT team is constantly monitoring the middleware, testing the API payload limits, and coordinating release schedules with an external software vendor.
You aren't just moving the complexity, though. You are rationalizing it.
How?
In a decoupled architecture, when Spain changes its reporting format, that regulatory update is just a simple configuration change in the external compliance layer. You aren't touching the ERP code at all.
Okay.
You don't have to freeze your core financial system to test a local tax update. You just activate the new jurisdiction. But let me ask you a very practical question about this ERP-centric model.
Go ahead.
If we allowed this localized native customization just to hit a go-live date, say the Germany team configures their SAP natively based on their specific needs.
Sure.
The UK team structures their tables a little differently. Maybe the Brazil team, because of immense local complexity, uses a localized third-party bolt-on. If they all do that, how does the global CFO ever get a consolidated real-time tax position without relying on armies of analysts doing manual data reconciliation across completely incompatible data models?
They get it the way they always have, through robust reporting and consolidation tools layered on top of the ERP, which actually brings us to a really fascinating divergence in our thinking.
Oh?
Data architecture and the so-called Internet of Agents. Your vision of perfectly standardized global data requires building a canonical data model and a governed intelligence hub.
Yes, a universal translator for all that disparate data.
Right, but you are asking to build that at the exact moment the organization is already stretched to its absolute breaking point migrating to S/4HANA. Doing that bloats the project's business case beyond recognition.
It secures the business case.
The steering committee approved funding for a modern ERP and in-memory processing, demanding that a massive global company rationalizes its entire chart of accounts, aligns every single business unit, and enforces perfect tax-relevant field completeness across every entity globally before they can turn the system on. I mean, it's an idealistic goal.
It's necessary.
It derails practical implementation. You are letting perfect be the enemy of good. S/4HANA is a powerhouse. It can handle massive, messy datasets. Let the business migrate, let the system stabilize, and then optimize the data architecture later.
Delaying data architecture is exactly what creates the multi-million-dollar mistake. Data is the ultimate variable here. We have to stop thinking of S/4HANA as just a faster transaction engine. It is fundamentally a data platform.
Obviously, it uses data.
But without a decoupled compliance layer that feeds canonical, standardized, validated data into an intelligence hub, all of those future AI deployments that executives are promising their boards become completely impossible.
Wait, really? You think the lack of a canonical data model stops AI completely?
Absolutely. I mean, think about what the next phase of enterprise finance actually looks like. It's the Internet of Agents, autonomous software agents running financial operations.
Right.
We're talking about AI that can handle complex account reconciliation, dynamic cash flow management, real-time tax optimization continuously at machine speed. But let's look at how an AI agent actually functions. It isn't magic. It is a program that needs structured data to make decisions.
Sure.
If an AI agent has to navigate 50 different locally customized SAP table structures, where tax code is in field X for Germany, but field Y for the UK, and maybe it's a completely different format in Japan, the agent fails. It cannot reconcile the data. Autonomous finance requires a foundational architectural separation between the transaction layer, the ERP, and the intelligence layer.
But look at the practical reality of what you're asking. You are asking the project management office of an ERP migration, whose mandate is to ensure the company can ship products and collect cash next quarter, to fund and build the pristine infrastructure for an AI revolution that might be 5 years away for their specific company.
It's not 5 years away.
It is for a lot of them. That is an impossible sell to a steering committee. The business needs basic invoice processing, ledger management, and inventory tracking to work tomorrow. You cannot mandate a greenfield data orchestration layer simply because AI agents might need a flawless canonical data model down the road.
It is not down the road. The mandates are happening right now, and the architecture to support it has to be built today. Let me use another analogy.
Okay, let's hear it.
Think about the physical infrastructure of modern communication. It's like a telecommunications company spending billions of dollars laying down state-of-the-art, high-speed fiber optic cables.
Right.
But the project managers decide it's too difficult and expensive to upgrade the endpoint devices, so they just hook up telegraph machines and only send Morse code through the new fiber.
Okay, that's a bit extreme.
But it's true. If we migrate an inconsistent, locally structured, heavily customized dataset into S/4HANA, the new system just becomes a much faster version of the exact broken platform it replaced. You're transmitting Morse code over fiber optics. Doesn't skipping the data orchestration layer effectively close the door on autonomous finance before it even begins?
It doesn't close the door at all. It sequences the transformation logically. I mean, think about your own analogy. You have to lay the fiber optic cable first, right?
Sure.
That is the S/4HANA migration. You make sure the cable works.
You make sure the trenches are dug, the lines are connected, and the base signals transmit without the entire network crashing.
Once you have a stable, functioning, high-speed network, then you start upgrading the devices connected to it.
But they never do.
If you try to invent the modern smartphone while you are still digging the trenches for the cables, you run out of money, the steering committee pulls the plug, and the project fails. My position is that you utilize the ERP-centric path and native SAP functionalities to ensure the business actually survives the migration.
Survive, just barely.
You mitigate the immediate existential risk of a failed go-live. Once the new system is stable, then you undertake targeted compliance optimization. You build that canonical data orchestration layer as a phase 2, driven specifically by the tax and data functions, rather than buckling the entire ERP program under the weight of a total operational redesign.
The problem with that sequence is that history shows us phase 2 for tax architecture never actually happens.
That's a generalization.
It's reality. Once the ERP is live, the budget evaporates, the consultants go home, the business moves on to the next crisis. Or, if phase 2 does happen, it happens under immense duress from a government audit, and it costs 10 times as much to retrofit a data model into a live running system than it would have cost to build it right the first time.
Well, retrofitting is expensive, yes.
We are looking at the exact same incredibly rare opportunity here, the S/4HANA migration window. It provides organizational attention, funding, and architectural authority that simply will not exist again for a decade.
That's a fair point.
Choosing to decouple compliance and establish a canonical data foundation right now is a compounding advantage. It cleans the core, removes the customization trap, and actually prepares the enterprise for real-time mandates and AI operations. Carrying over those embedded customizations just magnifies legacy flaws at a higher velocity.
I hear that. And my view remains grounded in the operational reality of enterprise risk management. We cannot ignore that S/4HANA implementations are uniquely complex and, frankly, notoriously difficult.
Absolutely.
Utilizing the ERP-centric model keeps the architecture within the established boundaries of the project scope.
It prioritizes system stability, process coverage, and day-one business continuity. The theoretical perfection of a decoupled architecture and an intelligence hub is a beautiful vision, but it must not jeopardize the functional survival of the enterprise. You have to survive the migration first, and you optimize later.
Well, despite our architectural differences, I think where we fundamentally converge is on the reality of what S/4HANA does to the environment. The speed has changed. The old world is just gone.
Absolutely. The latency buffer is gone forever. Real-time processing and continuous transaction controls mean that tax is no longer just some reporting exercise that accountants handle at the end of the month.
Right.
It is a critical gatekeeper for daily supply chain operations. And I will certainly agree with you that data quality is the variable that will ultimately determine long-term success. Regardless of where the compliance logic lives, whether that's inside SAP or in an external engine accessed via APIs, poor data will cripple the system.
Precisely. If the data is garbage, it doesn't matter if it's processed natively or externally. It's still garbage. It's just moving faster. Ultimately, this debate comes down to a choice of risks. Every organization, every steering committee has to weigh its tolerance for immediate project scope risk against its need for long-term operational agility.
Exactly. They have to ask themselves if their specific regulatory reality and budget allows for an ERP-centric approach, mitigating the immediate risk of missing their go-live date, or if their global complexity demands taking on the added implementation risk of decoupling, to ensure they aren't, building tomorrow's business on yesterday's architecture.
That really is the pivotal decision. Do you want to drop a fragile, obsolete engine into a chassis built for unprecedented speed and just hope the bolts hold? Or do you take the harder, more expensive path of building a decoupled architecture that actually matches the velocity of the machine?
It's a tough call.
It is. We will leave it to you to decide which path your organization is truly ready for. But one thing is certain, the speed is coming, whether your architecture is ready for it or not.